in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm super excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Matha. She is the VP of Global Culture, Diversity, and People at OneStream Software. Martha, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Well, thank you, Christina. Yes, my name is Martha Engel. I am she, her, and hers, and I am the VP of Culture, Diversity, and People at OneStream Software. Been with the company for about 7 years. And when I was little, what I wanted to be when I grew up was just in charge. I really thought about that question. I'm like, it wasn't like, a doctor or a nurse or a teacher. Like if we were playing teacher, I was the teacher. If we were playing restaurant, I was the head chef. If we were, playing cars, I was the pit boss. So that's kind of what I've always wanted to do. So being able to lead an HR department right now and focusing on talent management is really, really, where I wanted to be. So
I love that answer. You are the one of the people in charge here. When we played restaurant when I was younger too, with my grandparents, I'm an only child. I was also always the restaurant owner, so can relate there. Before we dig into your day to day and just projects and initiatives in your path, I would love to ask, what defines you, Martha, as a person?
yeah, I think what defines me is ultimately taking care of others. I want to know that the experience that our employees are having is something that they're not going to get anywhere else. I want them to know that they're seen and that they're individuals, and that really ultimately I love to exceed people's expectations. So that's what I think is a defining factor for me.
I love that. And you mentioned that you have been with the organization for 7+ years. What would you say has kept you at OneStream Software for that time? How have they made you feel seen at the company?
Yeah, I think going back to my childhood motivations, I've been in charge. I've been able to come in and develop an HR department. With when I started, we were only 30 employees, so it was just me. So that was everything from payroll and human resources to facilities and event management and all these things, right? So I got to have 20 different hats on and influence a lot of different areas. So as we've evolved, we've certainly started to specialize, and now I'm like entirely focused on culture and talent management, which is the area where I feel like I can have the largest influence because I've grown a lot of these people along the way. So that's really been what it is, like seeing those success stories and seeing people, come in and be sold on an idea of what OneStream is and what our culture is all about, and then actually live it. So that's I think what's kept me here is just those success stories.
I love that. I think those anecdotal success stories are really important to think about and are really great kind of, stories within the organization too, in terms of internal mobility, how
Yeah.
somebody, why they've stayed in an organization too. In terms of company culture, I mean, we talk about it all the time on this interview series, but I want to be really clear about what that means, especially for a global organization. We talked about how
Sure.
OneStream is in 19 different countries. What pieces of your kind of people and talent strategy are global and what really needs to remain local to that office or the group of folks working within the country?
Yeah, I mean, this definitely comes through in all areas of talent management, right? Certainly when we're recruiting and starting those conversations, we have certain standards we have to hire to, right? There's the job is the job, and we have to make sure we're going to get people in that are going to be able to fulfill that. But respecting and understanding kind of the boots on the ground, being able to engage with local talent or local experts in those different regions to understand how things operate or what to expect, even as basically from like a legal perspective, but certainly from a cultural perspective and how best to connect with people and what their expectations are coming in. I'm not, foolish enough to think that like the OneStream culture is like an imprint. We're going to all have the exact same experience. Our offices are very varied. They have being in so many different countries, even across the United States, right? Our engineering group in the Stratford, Connecticut office has a little bit of a different vibe. They're really big on ping pong there versus our Rochester office, where it's more of our HQ, and it's a bigger mix of like engineering and IT support and the G&A functions in that. They're a little bit more of like a basketball and dodgeball vibe, and it's a larger group too. So each group, right, has their own ways of letting go of stress, connecting with each other, different charities that they care about, right? They're just going to be a little bit different. If you don't respect those differences, you're going to get into trouble, right? We can't push the same culture across everybody. We respect that they're going to be different for each one. And now even more so with everybody at home, right? Like now my culture is, my my work office is very different from, what it was certainly 2 years ago. So if people are inviting us, into their homes now, like how do we maintain those different cultures and support people the way they need to be supported individually now, right? It's 1,000 different offices instead of, 19 different countries.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that too, because when you're inviting people into your homes, it's a really, personal experience. And you're right, people want to de-stress and be kind of flexible with the way they are working too. I think also
Mhm.
part of company culture is how you feel when you show up on Zoom, when you are
Yeah.
working, if you feel like you belong, you can present your best ideas. Can you share some examples of how diversity, equity, and inclusion really underlies your strategic initiatives and projects at OneStream? We know that DEI is not something siloed out. It's just one
Mm-mm.
department or, person's responsibility. That's a lot. So definitely wanted to ask you that question.
Yeah, no, and that's certainly one of my greatest strategic initiatives, right? Is talent management. So included under that, right? Those umbrellas include like talent acquisition, like we talked about, organizational development. So that's like our onboarding, L&D communications, and then our performance management and succession planning. Well, underlying all of those areas, right, is diversity, equity, and inclusion, like that sense of belonging for all of our employees. So in order for us to be attractive to top talent, they have to see themselves here, right? We have to know that, um, that they're going to be welcomed, they're going to be celebrated for being who they are, they're going to be, included and part of a welcoming team. So that's where, you know, our leadership team has to be inherently inclusive, right? And some of those are may have the best intentions, but don't have the skills or the tools to be able to say, here's how I build an inclusive team. Here's how I'm intentional in making space to have those private conversations, especially when we're all existing, behind a 2x3 screen, right? Um, so teaching them those tools and giving those tools, that's where our L&D department becomes so critical, because you can't fake inclusion. um, so making space for those human connections, and then helping our employees understand where they're going, right, and what those opportunities look like. That's what's going to help us, build that culture, create the empathetic, leaders that we need, and have that genuine care and TLC within the team. So that's what we've really been focused on in terms of our, DE&I, and certainly the belonging. So part of how we've done that is focused on our employee resource groups and
Mhm.
finding opportunities where, people with common traits, or, different topics they want to discuss or come together on, or different initiatives that are of concern to them. Um, they have, a place to do that. Managers make time for them to be together in those groups, and then they also gain exposure to executive leadership through the course of those conversations, so that leadership at the top understands what's happening and what's important to our people across the whole organization. So that's one major area where, DE&I has been that DNA of decision making, um, building those connections.
Yeah, you definitely can't fake inclusion or belonging. You want to be authentic. And when
Mhm.
people think about that sense of belonging within organizations, sometimes, people are worried about not being quote unquote nice or promoting a kind of really agreeable culture. But that's not what, company culture is all about. People are going to disagree, and that's okay. It's about
Sure.
that respect piece that you were talking about too, and the way you're communicating with folks. We talked about this a little bit in our kind of pre discussion, but we want to talk about how to not promote conflict avoidance, because you might have constructive feedback that isn't necessarily a bad thing. So how do you really encourage and support managers to create healthy team dynamics that aren't conflict avoidant?
Yeah, we've leaned on, the Speed of Trust from Franklin Covey. That's a program that we're promoting for all of our executive leadership has gone through it. Now we're pushing it through to um, our senior leaders, and it's available to all employees to be able to take. But it's the content there is really important. It gives people, again, the tools and the language to be able to sort through what they're thinking, and give them a common language to connect. So one of the common phrases through the Speed of Trust is, let me talk straight, right? Let's just do some straight talk here. So it disarms the conversation a little bit, because if I know that you and I are in disagreement, right, and I know I assume what your opinion is of something, right?
Mhm.
I want to enter it and say, I need you to hear me. Let's create a safe space. Here's what here's what I'm experiencing, or even giving them the language to push back on expectations, or set realistic expectations, clarifying, what the assignments are along the way, or recognizing where expectations aren't being met, right? Those are all, interpersonal skills. And a lot of it boils down to just how are you talking to one another. So um, you know, that's how we promote that, um, not conflict, not encouraging conflict, but not shying away from it either. Because the last thing you want is to hear, like, have an employee come to a performance review or something, and that's where they find out that they've been, consistently failing on something, or a manager being consistently frustrated and they feel like they can't communicate. Give people the chance to rectify it, and the only way to do that is to have that conflict and tell them what's wrong.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Giving people the resources and that common language is really great for effective communication and in performance
Hmm.
reviews or, specific times of feedback. You never want that to be a surprise and you want to come to the
Yep.
table and acknowledge, this is why, straight talk, as you were mentioning too. I know one of the other pieces of kind of the strategy this year has been around learning and development. I think that's so important for professional development, upskilling, and really focusing on people's growth within an organization. Where did you start in developing your new learning and development offering for your team?
Yeah, well, I started with hiring an amazing L&D leader. But step one was really like, kind of, how do we identify our gaps, right? Figure out the needs of the team. I talked to leadership about what traits we want to encourage here at OneStream. We're building this next generation. What are some of the traits? What's the secret sauce, at our company that we want to be able to duplicate or encourage in the next generation? So we don't lose that identity, we don't lose that culture. That was really key to getting their buy-in and recognizing, look, we identified that we have to have, employees that are, fully invested, that they understand what they're working towards, and that they value, going above and beyond and satisfying our customers and looking to achieve, we've got a bunch of people here that just they're a lot of brilliant minds, a lot of very hard workers, and they are at the top of their game. And so these are kind of our A players that are constantly challenging themselves and challenging the people around them. So how do we keep that level of engagement and passion in this next generation? We have to define those traits and then start to teach to those. And then celebrate where we see those wins. So that was the first cornerstone of our L&D offering, is like, what do we need to teach to? And then, of course, looking at our performance, metrics data, and being able to see, where there are other skill sets we need to support. But really, like, from a holistic view, it's understanding how we're going to perpetuate and foster that culture in the next generation.
I think that's a really great holistic way to look at it too. And in terms of just employees being really invested and just all of the projects that you're working on, in addition to kind of people and culture. I know that employees really care about that economic, social, and governance piece of the
Sure.
business too. And most people, I would say, or, from my perspective, speaking for myself, I don't know if like a people, culture, diversity, and inclusion leader would always kind of help develop the ESG offering at organization. Why was it important to you and your team that you really helped kind of, contribute to that project as well?
Yeah, well, our ESG offering is I see that as another opportunity for action. It's
Mhm.
us saying, here's what our values are. We care about our the communities that we work in, the environments that we're affecting. We care about our customers deeply. We value, follow through. And um, so the topic of ESG has come up with greater frequency, now more than ever, right? People want to know not just how are you going to get to net zero, but how are you going to actually improve the environment, right? It's not enough just to say, hey, like, we're net zero. No, we have to be able to demonstrate how we're giving back and how we leave this place better than how we found it. So I think that's why it's critical to us now, and critical to that whole OneStream culture, right? It can't just exist in a silo and it's one department that deals with it. We need to know their leadership when they're making decisions about, do we book that travel, for an in-person meeting, or do we actually make it a Zoom call,
Mhm.
right? And that they're thinking about, what is my impact to the world, quite frankly. So big ideas, but I think there's a lot of small ways where you can implement just the thought to consider where we can make smarter choices.
Yeah, really making change within those processes, and everyone, no matter what department or role you sit in, can really think about, what is your impact here? And I love the conversations around the triple bottom line. How are you contributing to your community? What is the impacts that you're having? From a more granular perspective, do you think it's a company's responsibility to really have an ESG component to their business at this point in time?
I would say yes. I mean, I think that it's just looking at the conversations, look at the news, like um the conversation is moving towards, constant sustainability. What are the green initiatives that you have going on? That's it's an imperative. It definitely is something that companies have to adhere to, and they have to show up in a real way for their employees, right? Going back to that employee experience, no one wants to work for a poser, right? No one wants to work for a company that like says they're going to do something and then doesn't follow through with it, right? So it has to be meaningful work, and it has to really, the only way to make that happen is for it to come, from the top and permeate the culture. So yeah, it's definitely a company's responsibility to have ESG as a component of their business.
Plus one, I agree too. I want to kind of ask too, in terms of showing up for employees and your team, part of that is really actively listening and showing that
Mhm.
you are hearing, folks as well. And I'm sure with new programs around learning and development, with kind of the ever changing world of work, employees have a lot of feedback to give. How do you see employee feedback management as a really critical tool to continuously build that culture of trust and listening at one stream?
We at OneStream anyway, we do employee surveys a couple of times a year, right? Which is one data point. We make sure that our managers are having, regular one-on-ones with their employees, and that feedback isn't just staying with them, right? But that's getting fed up
Mhm.
somewhere else. If there's larger issues or themes that we're seeing, we have our HR business partners that are in tune with all of those different directors and managers to start to pick up on what's going on. So that's another data point. Certainly, performance reviews is another place where we get information from what the employee experience is really like. Where are they faltering? Where are they thriving? And that's another place where we can get it. And then certainly, like, our whole HR department is available for our employees to reach out to if they have a larger issue going on, or there's something that's of major concern to them. Um, so that's how we've built sort of that culture of listening. It's no not a singular um, resource or tool that we're using to collect that. It really is just keeping our ears open in all possible instances, and that's how employees feel heard, right? And so it's not just enough to take that information, right? We want to be able to make sure there's strong follow-up to understand, we heard you, here's what we did about it, or we heard you, and this is, it's not an issue we can address today, but this is what we're considering for the future. Keep us informed. Those two-way conversations are really important.
Yeah, two-way communication, effective communication is really critical. And also just that piece of how are you kind of showing up for your employees? Every employee is different. Not everyone wants to raise
Sure.
their hand in a company all hands or speak up
Yep.
in a one-on-one. And you want to provide that time and space for folks to share their feedback. You mentioned, you can't action on everything right away, but can you share an example of how employee feedback has really inspired or impacted a change, whether it's a policy, strategy, initiative at OneStream?
Yeah, I think my whole existence is a pretty good example of hearing our employees and creating a change, right? So back up 2 years ago, so May of 2020, and we at that point in time, I think our employee base was maybe 500, 600 employees. Anyway, so at that point in time, it was, when we recognized the need to establish a diversity, equity, and inclusion space. Being
Mhm.
a small startup, in an accelerated growth company, candidly, our DE&I efforts, our ESG efforts, all of these things that are now so like at the forefront of what we're doing, were almost nice to haves, right? I was scrambling to get payroll done and to deal with performance issues and to, you know, close out our benefits and compensation offerings and deal with kind of the core logistics of human resources to get hiring, what we needed and to get the resources we needed. So we didn't have the built-in time for things like learning and development and our ESG offering and certainly diversity, equity, and inclusion. So after the George Floyd murder, we made it a priority to hear from our employees, right? And we opened up time to talk to them and gain understanding of what it is that they were experiencing and what they needed to see from us as an employer. Um, it made it a priority. It took it from being a, sort of candidly a back burner issue to now being at the forefront. So my role pivoted from being, a human resource leader in its entirety to then bringing in a partner that could take on more of the core operational HR components, so I could focus on how do we best support our people? What do we do? How are people feeling like they're belonging here? And then also, how are we supporting them in terms of learning? Where are we getting our talent from? And all of that. So that was really what kicked off my role as in talent management and diversity. So hearing our employees and understanding what they needed created my whole role and my whole department, quite frankly. So that's a huge example of how we've, and that employee voice inspired major change at our company.
Yeah, I think the employee voice has a lot of power there, and you want folks to be able to bring, as much of themselves to work as they can, and
Mhm.
making sure that they feel like they are included in the conversation, that the company does care about them as a person inside and outside of work is really crucial. In terms of, there's no playbook for the perfect workplace, being of an employer of choice, and we're seeing a lot of folks mix up the business as usual practices in the people space, which is really exciting. Is there anything that you are kind of the most innovative thing you've seen in the people space, give you a lot of excitement and enthusiasm around, and why?
Yeah, I think as far as innovation in the people space, like it's been nothing but innovation. I think
Right.
certainly in the last 2 years. So I've been consistently re-inspired by our people when we're asking them to pivot on the fly to work from home, or we're coming to them and being honest and saying like I'm not sure how we're going to proceed with this, or our procedures around vaccination are changing every other week. Like there's so much that we've had to pivot on so quickly, and the fact that we have the trust of our employees because they know we have their best interests in mind, and we've been able to consistently support them. It's not a singular, again, product that I can point to, or one action, but just the overall collective support that our community has come together to support one another has been, I think, hugely innovative. You wouldn't have made it in this industry, certainly as a small startup, if we were anything less than innovative. So yeah, I'm not. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that definitely answers my question. I think in this space, you definitely need to be dynamic and not static in your approach, and have that growth and open mindset to test different things, collect that feedback again, and see how you are kind of meeting people where they are in the world and their career journey and their personal trajectory. I know I asked a lot of specific questions around learning and development, inclusion and belonging, and your just journey to this work and the organization as well. But what is the kind of current, if you were to pick one next problem or situation you're trying to solve?
So I guess what's on the top of my list right now is focusing on our career development for our employees. So understanding what our succession planning needs are, and how we're going to continue to develop our people. The war on talent is real, right? The competition is fierce, and we have to help our employees who are here understand the value of staying here, right? And we've been very fortunate that our employees are hugely loyal. They understand the value proposition, but I want to make sure that they understand where they're going. So the next big leg of my talent management trifecta is to really develop what that performance management pathing looks like, right? We have the data, we have the engagement from the employees, but now how do we start to build out those avenues by which they're going to feel like they're growing and they're thriving in their careers. um, Having come from a small startup where we, about 30 employees overall, the growth was endless for those folks, right? The people that were coming in, call it 400 employees and less, there was nothing but upward growth for a lot of those joiners. But now that we're so much bigger, we're at just crossed over 1,000 employees. Not everybody's going to jump to a manager. Not everyone's going to be suited to make it to a director role. So how do we make those individual contributors still feel motivated and feel like they're making progress in a way that is genuinely meaningful. So that's my next hire. Actually, I'm in the hunt for a strategist to help join me in helping to develop that. But that's the next area I'm going to tackle.
Yeah, you definitely want to grow your people and make sure that they're developing in their careers. And in terms of today's talent market, it's about attraction, but also retention of current folks of your
Yep.
organization. Martha, is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share, or perhaps a call to action or key insight you want to underscore for listeners?
I think if I can leave anybody with, a little bit of advice is just do your best to make genuine connections with people. We're all so busy. I think everybody gets wrapped up in their day to day or just kind of getting through their next back to back meeting. Do your best to build time to actually connect with another person, whether that's someone on your team or someone outside of your department that is across the ocean that you want to just build in that time to have a genuine conversation and get to know them. In this environment, I think that's going to be critical to companies, building true culture and keeping people engaged. So stay connected.
Stay connected, create those meaningful and authentic connections too. Martha, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in the employee feedback management as a requirement for the company to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.